They say trust is what makes a family, but I've learned it can also be what breaks it. The day I moved into my son Frank's house was supposed to be the beginning of my peaceful chapter. Or at least that's what I told myself as I looked out the window of his silver SUV holding a small plastic bag filled with my medications and a faded photo of my late husband. You don't have to worry about anything now, Mom, Frank said, flashing me that practiced grin. I'll handle everything. I smiled back, though my chest tightened. My husband Thomas used to say that kind of confidence could hide a lot of unread fine print. But Frank was my only child, my baby. And even if I didn't always understand the way he ran things, brisk, loud, digital, I believed he meant well. Besides, what choice did I have? After my knee replacement surgery, it became clear I couldn't manage the old house alone anymore. The stairs mocked me, the walls echoed. So, when Frank offered to take me in, temporarily until we figure something better out, I packed my things and came. The first night, he showed me to a tidy guest room. We're going to make this comfortable for you, he said, already pulling out his phone to adjust the thermostat remotely. He didn't ask what made me comfortable. He didn't notice that I lingered at the windows, searching for the stars like I used to on my porch, or that I missed hearing my own footsteps on creaky hardwood floors. But I told myself that was normal. Transitions are hard, I reasoned. He's trying his best. The next morning, he handed me a stack of papers. Just some stuff to make things easier, he said. Health proxy, banking access, that sort of thing. I hesitated. He chuckled. Come on, Ma. It's not like I'm asking for your wedding ring. I signed. God help me, I signed. The first thing I noticed missing was my photo album. Not the cheap kind, the real one. Leather bound, heavy, filled with moments that still had warmth left in them. My wedding day, Frank's first steps, a faded Polaroid of us covered in flour one Christmas Eve when the power went out and we made bread by candlelight. Gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd misplaced it during the move. My eyes weren't what they used to be, and it wouldn't be the first time I forgot where I put something. So I asked Frank. He didn't even look up from his laptop. You brought too much stuff, Mom. I boxed up a few of your things. Put 'em in the garage. I'll sort through them later. The garage. That word tasted sour in my mouth. Thomas never let sentimental things go to the garage. He said that's where memories go to die, slowly under boxes of old wires and tax returns. That evening, while Frank was out with his wife Marlene, I shuffled to the garage, bracing myself against the wall. The light flickered when I pulled the string, casting long shadows across cardboard boxes and storage bins. But my boxes weren't there. I searched for nearly an hour, breathing in cold concrete and dust, until I gave up. My knees throbbed. My fingers were numb. When Frank came home, I asked again, this time firmer. He sighed, rubbed his forehead. Look, Ma, we needed to make room. The garage is for my tools now. You don't need all that junk anyway. Half that stuff was falling apart. He called it junk. He called my life junk. I didn't say anything, just went to bed early. But I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. That album had my mother's handwriting in it. My father's war medal was tucked between the pages. There was even a lock of my son's baby hair taped into the back cover. And now it was gone, not lost, erased. I began to wonder what else he'd decided I didn't need anymore. 2 weeks passed before I realized I hadn't seen a single piece of mail. No bank statements, no utility bills, Not even a flyer for that church down the street with the bright red lettering, "Everyone is welcome." I used to enjoy checking the mailbox. Back at my old house, I'd tie on a cardigan, shuffle out with my cane, and flip through each envelope like they were small pieces of a life still in motion. Even the junk mail made me feel seen, but now nothing. At breakfast, while stirring instant coffee with a plastic spoon, I asked Frank if he'd seen any of my letters. "Oh, yeah," he said, not looking up from his phone. "I switched everything to digital. Easier that way." "For who?" I asked quietly. He laughed. "For both of us, Ma. Come on, it's 2025. Who reads paper bills anymore?" "Me," I wanted to say. "I do." But I stayed silent again. Later that day, I waddled to the mailbox myself. It wasn't locked, but it may as well have been. Empty, hollow, nothing but air. I reached inside, hand shaken slightly, as if I might pull out something that had slipped through a crack in reality. Nothing. That evening, I waited until Frank left for the gym and opened the junk drawer in the kitchen. The one every family has: batteries, coupons, rubber bands, old menus. And there they were, my letters, neatly stacked and unopened, like little corpses wrapped in white. Bank of America, Kaiser Permanente, Social Security Administration. I held them in my lap and felt the house tilt slightly. I tore one open. There was a late fee on a card I didn't know was still active. Another showed an automatic withdrawal. Several, actually, all made by someone listed as authorized account holder. Frank. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, I realized something that chilled me deeper than any wind ever could. I hadn't just given him access, I'd given him permission, and he was using it to disappear me, quietly, one account at a time. It started with silence, a strange hollow quiet that filled the house when I returned from my weekend church retreat. I'd been gone 2 days, a women's group up in Napa. Just prayer, stories, and a few shared tears over burned coffee and banana bread that stuck to the pan. I remember standing at the front door that Sunday afternoon, suitcase in hand, the scent of something unfamiliar hanging in the air, pine cleaner and lemon wax, too much of it. I pushed the door open and paused. The living room was different. My china cabinet was gone, the antique clock that Thomas had fixed so many times, the one that chimed off by 7 minutes always, gone. My needlepoint pillows, replaced by something slick and gray. I shuffled in, breath tight. "Frank?" I called. No answer. In the dining room, strangers were carrying boxes. 2 men in cargo pants, a woman with blue hair and gloves. One of them smiled at me and said, "You must be Ellie. You have a beautiful collection." I blinked. I, excuse me. Frank came in from the kitchen, holding a tablet and grinning like a salesman. "Mom, you're early." I stood frozen, eyes darting from the empty corner where my bookshelf had been to the folding table now serving as a cashier's desk. "What is this?" I whispered. "Estate sale," he said, as if that explained everything. "Nothing huge, just clearing space. You weren't using half of this, and we figured it could go to people who'd appreciate it." I felt the air drain from my lungs. "Without asking me?" "You were gone," he said, shrugging. "I didn't want to bother you." He didn't want to bother me with the news that he was selling my life. I walked room to room, watching pieces of my memory vanish into shopping bags. The wooden duck from our honeymoon cabin in Lake Tahoe, the floral teacups my mother gave me, a quilt I made when I was pregnant with him, gone, priced, bagged, forgotten. That night, when the last car pulled away, I stood in the empty living room, floorboards creaking beneath me, and realized something bitter. Frank didn't think he was doing anything wrong, because in his mind, I didn't own those things anymore. The day after the estate sale, I didn't speak much. I moved slowly around the house like a ghost, tracing the outlines of vanished furniture with my eyes, touching the faded rings left on tabletops by things that used to matter. Frank whistled in the kitchen while making himself a smoothie, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something was shifting. The silence wasn't numb anymore. It had started to harden into suspicion, into fear. That evening, I called Margaret. She's an old friend, one of the few people left who still checks in. We used to work at the library together when the kids were small. She always wore her glasses on a chain and knew every book by its spine. "Come over," she said without hesitation. "I'll make tea." She picked me up the next morning and drove me to her condo near the coast. I held the mug of chamomile with both hands like it was a life raft. I told her about the sale, the mail, the digital statements, the missing things. Then I told her about the papers I'd signed after surgery. Her lips tightened. "Do you remember exactly what you signed?" I thought it was just so he could pay the hospital bills while I was resting. "Ellie," she said softly, "it sounds like he has power of attorney." The words hit me like a gust of wind that blows the breath right out of your lungs. Power of attorney. I had signed over the legal right for Frank to act on my behalf, to make decisions, to control money, to access accounts. I'd handed him the keys, thinking he'd guard the door. Instead, he'd opened it wide and started clearing out the house. Margaret made a call. An hour later, we were sitting in her lawyer's office, Mr. Jacob R. Palmer, a kind man in his 60s with soft eyes and fingers that tapped calmly on the desk as I explained everything. He listened, took notes, nodded occasionally. Then he opened a file on his computer and said, "I can pull the POA if we can prove coercion, fraud, or cognitive impairment at the time of signing. Do you remember being medicated?" I did. Post-surgery, groggy, in pain, signing papers between 4 drips and low blood pressure alarms. "Yes," I whispered. He looked at me gently. "Then, Ellie, we may still have a way out. I didn't grow up with money. My father worked in a factory until his back gave out, and my mother took in laundry for the neighbors to help keep the lights on. Every dollar we saved felt like a victory, a moment we stole back from the world that wanted to keep us scraping. That's probably why I was always careful. I balanced checkbooks, clipped coupons, and saved every receipt. After Thomas passed, I lived modestly, socking away what I could into a small savings account. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Mine until it wasn't. Mr. Palmer had asked for access to my financial history. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. He printed out the statements from the last 6 months and laid them out in front of me like a quiet autopsy of my life, line after line, transaction after transaction. $2,100, Home Depot $3,500, private home care services $6,800, renovation deposit. "Renovation?" I whispered. The house looked the same leaky faucet in the guest bath, same creaky floorboard outside my room. The only new addition I'd noticed lately was a flat-screen TV in Frank's bedroom and a car with a sunroof parked in the driveway. Mr. Palmer leaned in. "Do you recognize these care service charges?" I shook my head. "I take care of myself. I've never had a nurse or aide." Exactly. I stared at the number at the bottom of the page. Over $47,000 gone in 6 months. Gone. I gripped the arm of the chair, my hand trembling. Frank hadn't just helped with my money, he had drained it, piece by piece, under the guise of making my life better. I thought of all the nights I told myself not to complain, all the times I swallowed my discomfort because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I thought of how often I'd said, "He means well." No more. The next morning, I walked to the bathroom mirror, looked myself in the eyes, and whispered, "He's not helping me, he's helping himself." And I wasn't going to stay silent any longer. It was the last piece I truly loved. A deep blue armchair with wooden legs. Thomas refinished himself. I used to sit in it every Sunday afternoon, a book in my lap, the sun from the west window catching in the fabric just right. It held the shape of my body, molded by years of quiet living. I called it my corner of peace. So when I came home from an afternoon walk with Margaret and saw the space where it used to be, empty, glaring, wrong, something inside me fractured. I just stood there in silence. The sunlight still poured through the window, but there was nothing for it to touch anymore. "Where's my chair?" I asked, my voice smaller than I expected. Frank was in the kitchen stirring his protein shake. He didn't even turn around. "It was old. I donated it." I blinked. "Donated without asking me?" He finally looked at me. "Ma, it was falling apart. You never sat in it anymore." That was a lie. I had sat in it yesterday. "You had no right," I whispered. His face hardened. "You're being dramatic. I'm trying to create a cleaner space, less clutter." Clutter. He called my life clutter. That chair had been with me through every season of grief and healing. I read bedtime stories to Frank in it, held Thomas's hand in it the night before his first surgery, fell asleep in it listening to radio shows when sleep just wouldn't come. And now it was gone, without a word. That night I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone went to bed, staring at the tile floor. It was cold under my feet, colder than it should have been, and then something in me whispered, "He's not just taking things. He's taking pieces of you, one by one, hoping you won't notice until nothing is left." And for a while, I hadn't noticed, but now I did, and I wouldn't let him take anything else. I always liked Susan from next door. She's the kind of neighbor who still brings over extra banana bread and leaves your trash can up by the garage without saying a word. Her husband passed a few years before Thomas, and after that, we'd talk over the fence while watering the flowers, grief blooming alongside our roses. So when she knocked one afternoon holding a small Tupperware of zucchini muffins, I thought it was just a friendly check-in, but her face was tight, worried. "Ellie," she said softly, "can we talk outside?" We sat on the porch, or what used to be my porch, and I noticed she didn't offer the muffins the way she usually would. She held them in her lap like a shield. "I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way," she began, "but I saw your son talking to a realtor the other day, right out on the driveway." My stomach dropped. "A realtor?" She nodded. "Young woman, nice shoes. Had a clipboard. I overheard her say something about the market being perfect right now. Then she asked how soon the house would be available." My throat went dry. "Did Frank say anything?" Susan hesitated, then looked me in the eye. "He said, soon. She's not going to need it much longer." My heart started pounding. I tried to swallow, but it felt like my tongue was made of stone. "He said what?" Susan reached over and placed her hand on mine. I didn't know if I should tell you, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I sat there, blinking at the quiet street I used to know, the hydrangeas swaying in the breeze, the sound of kids biking past. Frank wasn't just taking my money or my things. He was planning to take my home, the one I raised him in, the one I paid for, the one with the door frame where his height was marked in pencil every year, now painted over in cold gray. That night, I opened my journal again. I added Susan's words, and I drew a line under them, dark and hard. He's preparing for a future that doesn't include me. I hadn't been inside a bank branch in nearly 2 years. Frank insisted everything could be done online. He set up the mobile apps, managed the passwords, even turned off the paper statements telling me, less clutter, remember? But after Susan's warning, I needed answers, real ones, in person. I called a cab and wore my best blouse, the pale blue one with the pearl buttons that Thomas used to say made me look like spring. I didn't tell Frank I was going. At the bank, a young man with a sharp haircut and too much cologne greeted me at the desk. I asked to speak with someone about my accounts. He smiled politely, but when he looked me up in the system, his expression changed. Do you have your ID, ma'am? Of course, I said, handing over my license. He frowned. It looks like you're not listed as the primary on this account anymore. You're a secondary signatory. I felt the world tilt. That's impossible. It's my account. He double checked. It was changed about 6 months ago. Under power of attorney, Mr. Frank Simmons is the listed primary. I sat down hard. But it's my savings, my pension, my voice cracked. He lowered his voice. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't show you transaction details without his authorization. Legally, he controls access now. I left the bank feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Outside, I sat on the curb while the traffic rolled by. I must have looked lost because a woman offered me her water bottle. I waved her off with a shaky smile. Frank had made me a guest in my own finances. He hadn't just taken the chair or the photos or the mail. He had taken my name off my own money. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote the words carefully. You gave him the pen, Ellie. Now take it back. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I held it in my hands like it might explode, not from force, but from truth. Mr. Palmer had promised to send a formal letter to Frank. Nothing aggressive, just a request for clarity, a little nudge to let him know his mother wasn't as blind as he thought. But still, as I sat there in my dimly lit bedroom, the lamp casting long shadows across the walls, I wondered what opening it would set into motion. I waited until the house was quiet, Frank's bedroom door shut, the sound machine he used at night humming ocean waves down the hall. Then I opened it. Inside, a single-page letter on firm cream paper. It was polite, professional, but beneath the surface, it carried weight. To Mr. Frank Simmons, it has come to our attention that recent financial decisions regarding the accounts and property of Ms. Eleanor Simmons may require further legal review. As the power of attorney was signed under post-operative conditions, we are conducting an inquiry into the circumstances of its execution, as well as the use of said authority in the months following. Please be advised that any further liquidation of Ms. Simmons' property or funds may be subject to legal injunction pending investigation. Jacob R. Palmer, Esquire. I read it 3 times. Each word settled into my bones like armor. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being difficult. I wasn't overreacting. I was fighting. I resealed the letter and placed it carefully into the outgoing mail slot in the foyer, the one Frank rarely checked because everything, he insisted, was handled digitally. That morning, I watched from the kitchen window as the postman picked it up. I didn't tell Frank it was coming. I just smiled when he poured his coffee and asked, "You sleep okay, Ma?" "Better than I have in months," I said, because I knew for the first time in a long while. He was about to wake up. I hadn't made a big deal out of birthdays in years. After Thomas died, the cake felt too sweet, the balloons too loud, but I always lit a candle anyway, just to remind myself that I was still here, still breathing. This year, I didn't expect a parade, but I thought maybe Frank or his wife would say something, a card, a hug, even just a happy birthday, Mom. Instead, the day passed like any other. Frank came and went, too busy to notice. His wife made dinner, and when I quietly mentioned the date, she blinked like she was trying to remember what it meant. "Oh," she said flatly, "is that today?" She turned back to chopping onions. I spent the evening in my room, staring at a cupcake Susan had dropped off that afternoon, a little vanilla one with pink frosting and a plastic candle poked into the middle. There was a note folded underneath. "You're not invisible, not to me. Happy birthday, Ellie." "Susan," I cried quietly, not because of the cupcake or the note or the silence, but because I finally understood the kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being erased, piece by piece, by the very people you once held in your arms at night, rocking them to sleep. I didn't blow out the candle. Instead, I lit it and let it burn down slowly, watching the wax pool onto the plate. That was the night I realized something chilling. Frank hadn't just forgotten my birthday. He had forgotten I was a person. And if he could forget that, then he could justify anything. I recognized her car before I saw her face. That same shiny black SUV with the gold emblem on the back, parked neatly in the driveway like it belonged there. I watched from the upstairs window, my hands trembling against the curtains. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, heels clicking confidently on the concrete. The realtor. Susan hadn't been mistaken, and now she was back. I didn't rush downstairs. I didn't confront Frank. Instead, I sat at the top of the stairs and listened. Frank opened the door. His voice was low, casual. "So, what's the timeline we're looking at now?" I froze. The realtor flipped through her notes. "I've got two families interested already. If we stage the house properly and list by the end of the month, we could be looking at offers over asking. You said your mom would be moving out soon." A pause. Then Frank, "Yeah, we're finalizing things. She's ready." "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "For the street." He hadn't even looked me in the eye when he said it. Hadn't asked if I had somewhere to go, if I wanted to leave, if I could. Number. He had already decided, and the worst part was he believed he had the right to decide. After she left, I came downstairs like nothing had happened. Frank was pouring himself another glass of cold brew, humming a song I didn't recognize. I sat at the table and stared at him. He didn't notice, not the way my hands were clenched, not the way I was shaken. He just glanced up and said, "Oh, hey, Ma. Don't forget to take your pills." I looked him straight in the eyes. "I didn't forget, Frank. And I didn't mean the pills, I meant everything. Sometimes you don't go looking for the truth, it finds you. Frank had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, something rare. He was usually so careful, always closing tabs, logging out, clicking the screen down like he was guarding national secrets. But that morning he was in a rush, phone pressed to his ear, one foot already out the door. I heard him say, "Yeah, the documents are all in there. I'll send them tonight," before the door clicked shut behind him. The laptop was still glowing. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, desperation, instinct. I stepped forward, hands trembling, heart pounding so loud I thought the neighbor might hear. The screen showed a folder, estate prep, final. I clicked. Inside, PDFs, spreadsheets, emails. The first document opened was a property transfer draft. My name wasn't on it, not once. The house was listed solely under Frank's name, pending sale to a company I'd never heard of. Another file was titled Assets Overview. It detailed my retirement accounts, the bank withdrawals, even a note that read, "She's unlikely to contest." Early signs of confusion, early signs of confusion. He was building a case against me, framing me as incompetent, setting the stage to silence me completely, and then one final document. Ellie Simmons, long-term care facility options. My photo was attached. The page outlined pricing, availability, and, in a column marked admission timeline, a note. Recommended move out within 30 days of property listing. I covered my mouth. He was selling my house, selling my story, and planning to store me like furniture, like something he no longer needed. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to my room, and locked the door. That night, I added 3 more pages to my journal. At the top, in bold ink, I wrote, "This isn't confusion. This is clarity." I made the appointment myself. Frank had no idea. I took a cab across town, a crisp spring morning pressing sunlight through the windows of Dr. Henderson's clinic. The same doctor who once cared for Thomas. The same one who looked after me when I had shingles. A man who still believed in listening before labeling. He smiled when I walked in, surprised but warm. "Ellie," he said, "what brings you in?" I told him everything, not all at once. I started with the sleep troubles, the weight loss, the tension in the house. Then I moved into the fog, not in my head, but around me. How I'd been told I was confused, forgetful, unwell. "I don't feel confused," I said quietly, "but they talk to me like I am." Dr. Henderson leaned back, his expression soft but serious. "I've seen it before," he said. "Sometimes when someone wants power over an elder, they don't use force. They use suggestion, repetition, gaslighting." Gaslighting? I'd read the word online once, but never thought it could live in my home, sit at my table, wear my son's face. He ran cognitive tests, reflexes, memory recall, word associations. At the end of it, he sat back down and said, "You're sharp as ever, Ellie. There's no cognitive decline, no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or disorientation." Then he printed a letter, "To whom it may concern. This letter certifies that Ms. Eleanor Simmons is of sound mind and body. She demonstrates full cognitive awareness and decision-making ability. Any claims to the contrary should be considered medically unfounded unless reassessed by a licensed professional." Dr. Peter Henderson, MD, I held the letter in my hands like a life raft, not because I needed permission to know my own truth, but because it was proof. Proof I wasn't fading, proof I hadn't imagined it, proof that the world trying to fold around me like a box was being built on a lie, and now I had something that could tear that box wide open. I met Mr. Palmer on a rainy Thursday. His office smelled like wood polish and quiet battles. He wore wireframe glasses and had a voice like a calm bell. Not loud, but you heard it clearly when it rang. I handed him the folder, my journal, the bank statements, a copy of the property deed, and finally, Dr. Henderson's letter. He read in silence, only nodding now and then. Once he looked up when he reached the line in my journal about Susan's warning. He underlined it softly with his finger. When he was done, he sat back and steepled his hands. Ellie, he said, I don't say this lightly, but what you've documented here is the foundation of a case. I didn't breathe. You have legal standing, he continued. He used your trust, misrepresented your condition, transferred assets under questionable consent. That's not just unethical, it's elder abuse, financial and psychological. I swallowed hard. I don't want to destroy him, I whispered. I understand, he said gently, but I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to protect you. He suggested we begin with a cease and desist letter, plus a formal challenge to the power of attorney. He would file an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the house and request a court hearing to review Frank's financial actions under oath. Will it go public? I asked. Only if it needs to, he replied. Sometimes just the sound of legal boots is enough to stop the marching. I left with a copy of everything and a calmness I hadn't known in years. Not peace. No, that was still far away, but a beginning. When I got home, Frank was in the living room watching a show about flipping houses. He turned and smirked. Hey, Ma, good walk. I looked at him for a long time. Yes, I said, but it's where I walk that matters. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That night, I placed Dr. Henderson's letter and the lawyer's card in my nightstand drawer. Next to them, I added a note in my own handwriting. Your silence kept you safe. Your voice will set you free. E.S. The envelope arrived with a soft thud on the kitchen table. Frank didn't notice it at first. He was busy stirring his coffee, scrolling on his phone, humming like the world was neatly in his palm. But when he saw the seal, the official letterhead, his fingers stopped moving. What's this? He asked, eyes narrowing. I stayed quiet. He opened it. His smile dropped before he finished the first sentence. A formal hearing has been scheduled in the matter of Eleanor Simmons versus Frank Simmons regarding power of attorney, financial control, and property ownership. Date, May 12th, 10 a.m. Location, Marion County Superior Courtroom. His mouth tightened. He folded the paper once, then again, like he could make it disappear. Finally, he looked at me. You went to a lawyer? I nodded once. He laughed, dry and mean. You're serious after everything I've done for you. You mean after everything you've taken? His face turned red. You wouldn't even have a roof over your head without me. My voice didn't rise. And you wouldn't have had a roof at all without me. I paid for it. I raised you in it. I built a life you're now trying to sell. He stormed out. I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled out my court outfit, a dark navy dress, simple and strong. I ironed it slowly, like each stroke of steam pressed strength back into the fabric. I laid out my shoes, not fancy ones, just the ones that made me feel like myself. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile and stared out the window. The hydrangeas were blooming again, same as the day Frank took me to the bank all those months ago. But this time, they didn't look like a symbol of surrender. They looked like witnesses. and I was ready to speak. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, though the air conditioner hummed overhead, but in feeling, like the walls had soaked up decades of disappointment and betrayal, and now it was my turn to echo within them. Frank sat across from me in a tailored blazer he hadn't worn since his wedding. He didn't look at me, not once, not when the bailiff called his name, not when the judge entered, not even when I stood up to take the oath. Mr. Palmer guided me gently to the witness stand. I placed one hand on the Bible, the other in the air, and said the words, "I do." Then I told my story, not with tears, not with rage, but with a calm that had taken me months to build. I spoke of the bank accounts, the hidden folder, the realtor's visit. I handed over the doctor's note, the journal entries, the voice memo Susan had secretly recorded when Frank mentioned long-term care options. The judge listened without interrupting. At one point, I glanced at Frank. He sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his hands knotted in his lap. Mr. Palmer ended with a single sentence. "This is not just about money. This is about agency. This is about a woman who was silenced in the one place she should have been safe, her own home." Frank's lawyer sputtered something about intentions, about concern, about efficiency and care. But the judge only nodded once, slowly, then turned to Frank. "Do you understand the weight of what you've done?" Frank opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That silence was the loudest sound in the room. When the ruling came down, it was clean and final. The power of attorney was revoked. All financial control returned to me. The house would be reviewed for fraudulent transfer. A family counselor would be appointed for reconciliation if I wanted it. When I left the stand, Mr. Palmer squeezed my hand. "You did it," he whispered. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was the part where I began again. The door creaked the same way it always had. Same old hinges, same soft carpet beneath my feet. The upstairs bedroom had been mine once. Before everything shifted, before I was moved downstairs for convenience, for safety, because the stairs were too much. Now I was climbing them on my own. No one waited at the top, no one watching, no one blocking the door. I opened it and stepped into sunlight. It spilled across the bed, catching dust in golden threads. The dresser stood right where I left it, empty but sturdy. My rocking chair was still by the window, though someone had tried to store boxes around it. I moved them aside. Then I sat, slowly letting the wood groan beneath me, letting the silence breathe. This room didn't feel like victory. It felt like return, like reclaiming a piece of my voice that had gone hoarse from being ignored. I spent the afternoon putting things back into place, my books, my photo frames, the painting Thomas had given me on our 25th anniversary, the one of the lake where we used to fish in the summer. I hung it again, this time at eye level. Later, I opened the window. The neighbor's wind chimes rang softly in the breeze. Somewhere down the street, a kid was learning to ride a bike, the wobble and laughter echoing faintly like music from an old life. I sat in that room until dusk. Then I picked up my journal, not the one filled with records and warnings, but a new one, blank, clean, white as snow. On the first page, I wrote, "They took the room, but not the woman who filled it, Ellie." And then I closed it, stood up, and made my way downstairs to cook my own dinner, in my own kitchen, in my own house. I didn't plan to find it. I was reorganizing the drawers in the downstairs hallway, the ones I hadn't touched since Frank and his wife had taken over the space. Mostly old papers, expired coupons, and broken pens. But tucked between an old utility bill and a folded dish towel was a sealed envelope. It had my name on it, my full name, written in Frank's unmistakable handwriting. Mom. I sat on the bottom stair and opened it. I don't know if you'll ever read this or if I'll ever have the courage to say it out loud. But I need to try. I didn't mean to become this person. I thought I was helping. I really believed that. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being about you and started being about control. My own fears, my own failures. Selling the house wasn't about you, it was about me. I felt like a failure in my own life, drowning in debt, trying to look strong. And then I saw this house, this history, and I thought maybe I could fix something, fix me. Instead, I nearly erased you. If you ever forgive me, I'll be grateful. But if you don't, I understand. I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking anyway. Frank. The words blurred through tears. I didn't know when he wrote it, before the hearing, after, maybe during one of those silent mornings when we passed each other like strangers. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back in its envelope, and tucked it into my new journal, not to forget it, but to remember that even the people who hurt us are human, and that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's a choice. That night, I baked lemon squares. Frank always loved them as a boy. I left a few on the counter with a note. You were wrong about one thing. I never erased you, Frank, but I won't let you erase me either. Mom. The house was warm that morning, not from the heater or the oven or the April sun, but from something inside, something that had been missing for a long, long time. Laughter. Emily and Max were in the kitchen with me, elbows dusted with flour, arguing about whether we should make chocolate chip cookies or snickerdoodles. I let them debate while I mixed the butter and sugar, letting the sound of their voices fill the walls like a lullaby I hadn't heard in years. Frank sat at the dining table, quiet, watching, not trying to lead or explain or defend, just present. He had asked if he could stop by. No lawyers, no demands, just to help with the kids. I said yes, not because I had forgotten, but because I had forgiven myself for not seeing it sooner, for not speaking up, for letting the love of a mother override the voice of a woman who knew better. Emily brought me a crayon drawing. It was our house, the porch, the trees, the little mailbox with the crooked flag, and in the window, 3 stick figures, one tall, two small. Above it, in big purple letters, Grandma's house. I kissed her forehead. Later that afternoon, I sat alone by the living room window, the same window I used to stare out of, waiting for someone to notice me, to hear me, to ask why I always ate alone. Now I didn't need to wait, because this home, the walls, the air, the quiet corners, they remembered who I was. And finally, so did I. I opened my journal and wrote one last entry. They tried to take the house, the dignity, the name on the door, but what they forgot was simple. This was always my home. I built it. I loved in it. I lived in it. And I'm still here, not just surviving, living. Ellie.